I think it's been pretty obvious for a while that one of the goals of kind of like pushing trans people out of public life, and particularly this thing where they are talking about schools, they're doing all this, you're not allowed to talk about pronouns with students. We've had questions about, well, what does that mean for transgender teachers? If a transgender teacher tells students their pronouns, is that like educating them on pronouns and therefore breaking the don't say gay rules? Well, it seems like there is a question in Florida indicating that, they can't restrict that. It's not educating on it or whatever. Like if the teacher writes their name and their pronouns on the board, it seems like the First Amendment, according to one judge, is on the side of trans people being able to use their preferred pronouns in the workplace. But we know, at least I've been speculating for a while, that basically this type of restriction on trans people is trying to push us out of this. Like they don't want us around their children. They can't explicitly make a law, usually, saying you can't be a teacher if you're trans. But, if they create a hostile work environment, if they say, oh, you can't talk about your life outside of school at all because that's considered educating on transness or whatever, that's like an indirect way of forcing us out of our jobs, right? As usual, we've suspected for a while their earnest desire to just not have any transgender teachers. But thank you, Governor Greg Abbott from Texas, for just straight up coming out and saying, because we've all suspected it for a while and y'all are not smooth. He says, quote, "We want to end trans and gender nonconforming teachers." He was giving a keynote speech to the Young Conservatives of Texas, stating his intention to end trans and GNC teachers. The statement follows crackdowns on trans teachers in various Republican-controlled states. Yes, the book bans, the don't say gay stuff. Greg Abbott repeatedly refers to a trans teacher as a, quote, man dressed as a woman. And he states that the teacher's mere presence, quote, normalizes the concept of being transgender or GNC. And he asserts that the state needs to try to prohibit this. He says this kind of behavior is something we need to end in the state of Texas. If you ask a non-binary teacher their pronouns, can they just say it's classified? True. Let's see. So here's the full quote, or at least a fuller quote. Up the street from where we are right now is Lewisville, Texas. In Lewisville, Texas, in the high school recently, as in just a month ago, they had a high school teacher who was a man who would go to the school dressed as a woman in a dress, high heels, and makeup. Now, what do you think is going through the minds of the students in that classroom? Are they focusing on the subject that this person is trying to teach? I don't know. What I do know are these two things. One, is this person a man dressing as a woman in a public high school in the state of Texas? He's trying to normalize the concept that this type of behavior is okay. This type of behavior is not okay. And this is the type of the behavior that we want to make sure we end in the state of Texas. Got a little bit repetitive there for a minute there, bud. So, of course, like we said, we've known this for a while. We've known that this is intentional. Yeah, truly. What are we going to... Is this a dress code issue? We're going to have mandatory suits for women and mandatory dresses for women? What is the direction that this is going in? If you're enjoying this video, hit the like button. Maybe subscribe, hit all notifications if you want. Feel free to check out the links in the description. You might find some merch you like. Or you can hit up the Patreon to support the content and find free stuff. And of course, yes, the way that he has stated this implies, this type of behavior, we want it to end in the state of Texas. He's not just talking about teachers. They, of course, what they're saying is they don't want students to think that being trans is normal, which, of course, if you teach people that being trans is not okay, then they're less likely to be out as trans. It's not necessarily going to change whether they are trans, but it is going to change whether they're out as trans. Yeah, what a radical concept that being trans is normal. Genuinely, it's so strange having a thing that, this happened to me, I would say. I didn't choose to be trans. It's my brain just works better from a certain perspective. That's a thing that I had to work through. It's not a thing that I chose and sought out. It's just a thing that happened to me. And for this to be portrayed as a societal ill that we need to keep out of our schools, it's getting hard to have an emotional reaction. Sometimes I'm really upset by it, but right now I'm just what is your problem? What is wrong with you, actually, that you keep making such a big deal out of what other people are doing. Like, is it really such a societal ill if 2% of the total population is transgender? And of course, like, I guess he doesn't specify that he wants to restrict gender. I guess he's like implying that he wants to restrict gender nonconformity because, you know, if a man went to school dressed as a woman as a joke, for example, would this be a problem? Or like if we had classical theater style where men were playing the roles of women, like that's often played for comedy as well. Is that bad? If it's drama, is it bad? Like, is it only if you earnestly identify as a woman that that would be a problem? Because yeah, the implication is also that, yeah, if you want to ban gender, where are the limits on that? Are women allowed to wear pants? Are people only allowed to wear certain colors? Like if a man wears a pink shirt, like if it's a pink button-down shirt with a normal collar, normal men's shirt, is that okay? But then if the collar is like frilly or if it has like decorative embroidery on it, then it's too feminine and it's not okay. Like what are the limits on that? It's impossible to enforce this kind of thing. And we're already seeing that this is running into First Amendment challenges with both the way that people dress and the way that people are comporting themselves. In Tennessee, they tried to pass an overall drag ban that was struck down as being basically a restriction on the freedom of expression. And similarly, in Florida, it's like considered a restriction on a teacher's freedom of speech to prevent her from self-identifying her pronouns and her name. Has there been an explicit update to Title IX explicitly protecting trans people? I haven't heard about this. I know that this has mostly been reliant on precedent in the past. Like when these laws are working their way through, or when these cases are working through in the court system, it's usually something like, you know, if it's happening in the schools, then it's discrimination on the basis of sex to tell a trans person that they have to use XYZ bathroom. But it's cool if they've added some kind of specific trans-related protection. That's good stuff. Yeah, Aaron points out that there was a Supreme Court decision, Bostock versus Clayton County, which specifically states that Title VII protections around non-discrimination in the workplace apply to trans and gender non-conforming people. That court decision is currently being used to overturn anti-trans laws in similar Title IX cases in schools, as well as generally bathroom bans, sports bans, and more. So it's usually by the interpretation of the courts that trans people are considered protected. Like the interpretation of what does sex mean when we're talking about sex-based discrimination. Reading. Yeah, in Florida, there was this similar thing. We just covered this case of a teacher who she got a preliminary injunction on this expansion of the Don't Say Gay bill that was telling her she couldn't use her pronouns in the school. Much like Greg Abbott, the attorneys for the state of Florida argued that trans teachers in the classroom were a, quote, distraction to students and that a trans woman teacher was harming her students' education with her mere existence and expression of her identity. However, the judge struck this down, noting that the trans woman teacher had higher test scores than the district average. And of course, it remains to be seen like how this is going to work going forward. You know, these various Republicans across the nation are going to be leaning into this anti-trans politics stuff. That has not been shown to be very popular, even amongst the Republicans. The willingness of some influential Texas Republicans to endorse Governor Abbott's position in the video suggests that these people will be leaning into the anti-trans politics this year. And obviously that could harm their candidacies. And of course, regardless of specifically electoral consequences, the state has already become harsher for trans people in recent years. Like Attorney General Ken Paxton has continued to subpoena medical records of trans individuals who cross state lines to obtain care, also attempted to obtain lists of PFLAG members. Greg Abbott was investigating trans families across the state under the premise that providing the medical care is child abuse. And this is just a continuation, more of the same. Things have already been getting worse in Texas for trans people, and this is just trending further in that direction. Now, we're not covering today any particular proposed law. Just want to be clear, we're not having a discussion about legislation working its way through. But in Texas, they do have a tendency to do things in this roundabout we're using executive powers kind of way. So if the governor has within his power anything that he can use, you know, put down an executive order, or if the attorney general does something, like some of these fascist actions do not require the consent of the legislative body. That's why it's so scary, and that's why we call it fascist, because, you know, we go through this process of we vote for representatives, and those representatives are supposed to vote basically based on what their constituencies want, and they often don't. But even, you know, in the case of, there have been times, I believe, even in Texas, where they tried to pass an anti-trans law through the legislation. They couldn't, and then they just went ahead and issued executive guidance. Oh, it was the child abuse one. Like, if you won't amend the parts of the law that are talking about child abuse to include trans care specifically, then we are just going to executively declare, using the Board of Medicine or whatever, that that trans healthcare is not substantiated well in the medicine, and therefore if a parent gets that care for their kid, then we're going to have an investigation. That's executive powers undermining the will of the people. The people who were elected to represent their beliefs on writing laws were completely overridden. And that's been an ongoing story in Texas for a while. So with that precedent, knowing that that's how things have gone in Texas in the last few years, it's pretty reasonable to surmise that they will try to find some way, whether it's through legislation or through some executive action or through some court thing, that they're allowed to like not hire trans people or something, you know, declare cross-dressing to be a type of perverse immorality. And then of course you can't put it in the schools, kind of thing. Like, just executively expand the definition. Yeah, it's not dissimilar, I think. Someone in chat says, I remember when the only black girl in my grade got busted for, quote, distracting clothes more often than anybody else. I still think about it. You know, why is it fundamentally distracting? I think most people, and most kids especially, just kind of get used to trans people. It might be a bit of a distraction initially, but it can't be a distraction every day. Like, with all the crap that goes on in a high school, and the fact that this is only one out of your like 8 different teachers, and this teacher is trying to teach you English or something, like something that's not even, it's like, oh God, here we are with the assignments again. But this teacher is actually getting the students to be more successful than the average in that district. Like, the novelty will wear off. There's no way that this can last forever. Truly, if we were to implement a policy like this, it would just result in fewer teachers. And even cis teachers are already leaving the profession because of probably mostly financial reasons, honestly. All these restrictions are just going to result in fewer teachers, more bullying, and like a worse overall society with less cohesion. Thank you, my patrons, especially Tiago Nascimento, Mersh Rolvag, Amanda B., Michelle Frateroli, Wellington Marcus, Michelle Winter, Danielle McDonald, Suzanne Maynard, DZXN, Spooky Heather Sylvia, Ella V. Nobody, Pasnell Infinity, Jamie Jam, Sojo, Nova, Elizabeth Bartell, Athiet, Kevin Young, Desi Quiche, Celeste, Liam Hodgson, and Mr. Atheist.